Jeremy Clarkson had 200 acres sitting on some of the best ground in Oxfordshire this year, and he grew nothing on it. No wheat, no barley, not one seed went into that soil. Here's the part nobody's telling you. He did it in the same week British wheat hit its highest price in years. Think about that for a second. Every farmer in England was watching grain prices climb, and the most famous farmer in the country looked at his own land and decided the smartest thing he could do with it was absolutely nothing. That's not bad luck. That's a man who sat down, did the maths, and worked out that farming that ground would have cost him money, even at the best price wheat has seen in years. By the end of this video, you'll know the exact number that made him walk away, and why that number should terrify almost every arable farmer in Britain. If you want the real stories behind Clarkson's farm, not the headlines, the actual reasons underneath them, this is the channel for that. Hit subscribe before we get into it, because what's coming next changes how you'll watch every future episode. And I want you to hold on to that number for a moment, because most people watching this will assume it's small. A rounding error. Something a farm with a television deal and a farm shop and a pub can simply shrug off. Because once you see the shape of this, you will start noticing it on every farm you drive past. On the 27th of July, Clarkson wrote something in his column that most people scrolled straight past. He said this year, 200 acres of diddly squat grew nothing at all. And the reason wasn't weather, wasn't disease, wasn't the council for once. He said they knew, before a single seed went in the ground, that planting wheat or barley on that land would lose money. Not feared, not suspected, knew. That means somebody at diddly squat sat down before the season even started, ran the numbers on 200 acres of prime Cotswold farmland, and concluded the most profitable thing to do with it was leave it empty. Every outlet that picked up that story ran with the obvious assumption that prices must have crashed. Grain rotting in silos, nobody buying, the usual commodity horror story. Except that's the opposite of what actually happened. Go and check the arable report for the week before Clarkson's column ran. British wheat futures for November closed that week at just under £200 a ton, up sharply on the week before. On the Wednesday, the contract briefly broke through £200 a ton for the first time. A contract high. In the exact week Clarkson made this decision. So say it plainly, because this is where the story flips. Jeremy Clarkson looked at 200 acres of his own land, at the best wheat price the market had offered in years, and still concluded that growing wheat on it would lose him money. That's not a farmer having an off year. That's a broken equation. And once you see it, it doesn't unsee itself. Ask yourself why a market that's supposed to reward the people producing food is instead telling the country's most visible farmer that producing food is the wrong move. For this year's crop, that figure landed at £1,659 per hectare. Up again on last year, mostly because fertilizer prices stayed high on the back of gas costs. Now take that near-record wheat price, just under £200 a ton, and divide the cost by the price. You get 8.3 tons per hectare. That's the number nobody said out loud. That's what an English wheat crop needs to yield, at the best price in years, just to break even. Not to make a profit, not to pay for next year's seed, just to get back to zero. So what did English wheat actually yield last season? Around 7 tons per hectare. Read that again. At the best price in years, the national average doesn't even reach break-even. It falls short by more than a ton on every single hectare. Clarkson didn't abandon that land. He read the number correctly and refused to pay for the privilege of losing money. And notice what that means for every farmer who doesn't have a television show behind them. If the national average yield sits below break-even at the best price the market has offered in years, then a below-average year, a wet spring, a poor batch of seed, doesn't just mean a smaller profit. It means a bigger loss stacked on top of a loss that was already there before the tractor left the shed. Now put it on his ground. 200 acres works out to roughly 81 hectares. At that cost figure, putting a crop in that ground would have cost around £134,000. Sell it at 7 tons a hectare, at that near-record price, and it comes back worth around £113,000. That's a loss of roughly £21,000, in a good year, at the best price the market has offered. Now push the price all the way up to that contract high the market briefly touched. The field still loses around £17,000. Read that twice. The market handed British farming its best wheat price in years, and 200 acres of decent Cotswold ground still couldn't pay for itself, which means those empty 200 acres are, on paper, the single most profitable part of the entire arable operation at Diddley Squat this year, because they cost nothing. Two things need saying here, because this channel isn't going to pretend otherwise. First, that cost figure is the full cost. It includes rent, labor, machinery. Strip that back to just seed, fertilizer, and spray, and plenty of farms are breaking even on that narrower measure, and there's nothing wrong with running it that way. But full cost is the honest question, because it asks, is this land, this labor, this machinery earning anything at all, even at a record price? On that measure, English wheat isn't washing its face. Second, these are national averages, not Diddley Squat's actual accounts. Clarkson hasn't published a field-by-field breakdown. His soil, his rotation, his yields will differ from the national number. What the numbers prove isn't his exact figure. What they prove is that his decision wasn't eccentric. It was arithmetic any arable farmer in England could run this morning, and a lot of them already have. Here's the thing, though. The 200 acres wasn't really the story Clarkson was telling. It was the evidence. The real subject of his column was who's now in charge of deciding whether that arithmetic changes. Clarkson's line about it will get quoted for weeks, but underneath the joke is the actual point. The department that decides whether it's worth putting seed in the ground is run by people who've never had to make that call themselves. 8.3 tons a hectare isn't an abstract number to a working farmer. It's the difference between drilling a field and leaving it empty. It decides what this country grows. And Clarkson said it plainly. He expects things to get worse for farmers under this government, not better. Having run the numbers ourselves, it's hard to argue he's wrong. So what happens to land that can't pay for itself growing food? Clarkson gave his own answer. Renting it out for anaerobic digesters, solar panels, half joking, data centers. Think about what that means. Nobody has to vote to end British food production. It happens one field, one spreadsheet, one August afternoon at a time. A farmer works out wheat loses money, multiply that across every arable farm in England, and you've changed what this country grows without a single announcement being made. That's the real warning inside those 200 empty acres. And it is already happening well beyond Diddley Squat. Drive through the countryside now, and you will see fields that used to grow wheat covered instead in solar panels, or fenced off and feeding gas plants that never produce a single loaf of bread. Nobody announced a policy to make that happen. No minister stood up and declared that Britain would grow less food. It happened quietly, one landowner at a time, each of them running the same arithmetic Clarkson just ran out loud. When the spreadsheet says food loses money and energy doesn't, the field stops being a field. Now, some of you are already thinking it. Clarkson isn't exactly the poster boy for struggling farmers. He's got a TV deal, a farm shop, a pub, a brewery. He's said himself the entertainment money is what keeps the farm alive, and most farms don't have that. All true. But sit with it for a second, because it doesn't weaken the story, it strengthens it. If a 1,000-acre farm with a global TV show, a farm shop pulling in 250,000 visitors a year, a brewery and a pub attached to it still can't make 200 acres of wheat pay, what chance does the farm down the road have, with none of that? Clarkson isn't the exception that proves farmers are fine. He's the best resourced arable operation in the country, and even he just went public with a number everyone else has been swallowing quietly. This is a farm that spent 5 series diversifying into everything except arable farming. And now, for the first time, it's publicly refused to farm a fifth of its own ground, not because of a bad harvest, but because of a spreadsheet, at the best wheat price in years. That's the real story. Not that Clarkson left a field empty, that he ran the numbers, found English wheat needs more than it's giving back, and said out loud what a lot of farmers have worked out privately and never mentioned. If you farm, put your own cost per hectare in the comments. Just the number, winter wheat, this year. I want to know if Clarkson's the outlier here, or just the only one with a newspaper column and nothing left to lose by telling the truth. And if you don't farm, tell me this instead. When you find out empty ground made more money than a full field, what does that tell you about where British food is actually heading? Because this isn't really a story about one man and 200 acres. It's a story about what happens to a country when growing its own food stops making financial sense, and almost nobody outside farming notices until the fields have already changed. Subscribe if you want the real story behind Clarkson's farm before anyone else is telling it. See you in the next one.